Greetings fellow Mist Wanderers, my name is Steve Morgan and this is DM of the Mists, covering all things Curse of Strahd and Ravenloft. This video is all about the exciting topic of travel around Barovia. Not just the sort of explaining how it is in the book, such as travel pace, the scale of the map and random encounters, but a whole bunch of things that hopefully people will find useful if you're starting to run Curse of Strahd or in the middle of running Curse of Strahd. A few handy tools that I found handy when running Curse of Strahd. Sort of talk about how travel kind of generally works, like story-wise, like they start here, they're likely to go here and then here and here. A few quirks with the map, including one point that people think is a shortcut but isn't. The whole subject of should you give your players a map and what I think of that, or if you don't give them a map for straight away, when and how should they get a map. And then a few other things such as flavour, travelling at night, and if you're thinking of adding extra locations on the road. So firstly, let's talk about the sort of travel pace rules and the sort of default size of Barovia. So travel pace rules can be found in the player's handbook, and a normal pace is 3 miles an hour. Now, I double checked in I grew up with 2014, the original 5th edition rules, then there's now 5.5e that came out in 2024. And I double checked and the speed and the types of pace are the same. The only differences are the things like stealth and perception while you're, marching along wherever. Those rules are a little bit different in the new rules, but otherwise it's the same. And the scale of Barovia is 1 hex is 1/4 of a mile. So that means that 4 hexes is a mile. And so if they travel 3 miles an hour, at the normal pace, it's 12 hexes in 1 hour. There is a great calculator that I used. I'm sure there's quite a few calculators and tables people have done over the years, but my favourite is by Dragna Carter of Curse of Strahd Reloaded fame, where you can say starting point this part of the map to end point this part of the map, and it will tell you how far it is, how long it takes. And you can even change, if you decide to change the size of the map, you can even change the sort of scale. So if you change it from 1/4 of a mile per hex is 1 mile is 1 hex, then you can make that adjustment in the tool instead of having to multiply by 4 or however you're changing it. Speaking of map size, there are people who think that Barovia rules as written is very small, and it is kind of small. I think this has been done on purpose for game design reasons. I actually did a video all about this. It's, as I record this, my most popular video ever, and it's one of my oldest videos as well, where I say that I think the reason Barovia is small is for game design reasons. And while I don't say don't make it bigger, I say if you make it bigger, be careful of these things that may change as a result, and you may need to make additional changes to sort of make it work. I won't say any more about that here. Please go to that video if you haven't seen it already. And then sort of generally how travel works through the campaign. It's a sandbox, and so people can kind of go anywhere, but it still kind of follows an order. So if you're running it by the book, as the book suggests, they start on the east side of the edge of the map, enter Barovia that way, and end up in the village of Barovia on the east side of the map. And then from there, it's likely they'll go to Valaki. And then from Valaki, that's where everything opens up. So they might go north to the lake and try and find the Mad Mage, or they can go west to all these other places that are new to discover, including Krezk and a few other places, or they might backtrack and go east back towards, say, the old Bone Grinder or the village of Barovia. And I imagine lots of campaigns kind of work that way. So it's kind of linear to begin with, get to Valaki, and then Valaki's almost sort of like the base. Unless things get messy in Valaki, because Valaki's kind of a bit of a powder keg about to explode, and it might be the case that players nope out of it, or they get exiled, or who knows what. So if Valaki implodes or explodes or whatever, then they might have to find a new base, and that could be Van Richten's Tower, could be the winery, could be Krezk, assuming Krezk also doesn't go weird, but there's other places they might be able to call home temporarily. There is a thing where I thought this was just a YouTuber suggested it, but it's actually suggested in the Curse of Strahd book in some of the plot hooks. It says alternatively you can consider starting them on the west side of the map near Krezk. I personally wouldn't recommend this, and I think there's a lot of DMs who wouldn't recommend this as well, because then they miss out on the sort of natural order of events where they, meet Irina and escort Irina to Valaki. I would probably only ever recommend this if you are running Curse of Strahd for people who've played Curse of Strahd before, whether they completed the campaign or maybe they got halfway through a campaign that fizzled out. that could be a good thing, potentially, because then they're not doing the whole Irina Ismark, let's go to Vallaki thing. They're experiencing it from a different angle and a different perspective and arriving in a different way. But like I said, I probably wouldn't recommend that for brand new players playing Curse of Strahd for the first time. There is a really cool 3D map that somebody made that really shows the topography of Barovia. So you can it's got the sort of black line showing the mountains, but this tool is great. Now, it used to be on a website, but then the website came offline. But luckily, through a bit of digging on the Curse of Strahd subreddit, I found a comment of theirs where they said, here's the files on Google Drive. You can download it to your own computer, and then you can still use the map through your browser. So instead of accessing the tool through their website, they're essentially saying, here are the files, you can do it yourself. And I actually tested this and it can confirm it works. So I used to use the tool before it went offline, before this website went offline, and then I downloaded the files and was able to use it on my machine. And I'll probably do a thing in multiple parts of this video for this next segment showing the map and spinning around so you can get a real feel for like the mountains and the sort of scale and the heights and that kind of thing. I think it's a great tool for understanding, the windy roads and why they're windy, because they're trying to like skirt the sides of hillsides and things like that. While I'm on the subject of sort of the roads of Barovia, it looks like a shortcut that if you go to Tser Falls encampment, you can then head north and then get to the bridge that way. It actually says in the Chapter 2, Areas of Barovia, Area H, Tser Falls, it explains that if characters reach Area H from the Vistani encampment, which is Tser Falls encampment Area G, that you reach the base of a canyon and you can see the bridge overhead. So that suggests that people then have got to go, they can either climb up there, good luck, or they have to backtrack and go around. So I'm mentioning this because I've seen it catch out a few DMs. It should probably be in one of my Curse of Strahd mistakes DMs make videos where people think that this is some sort of shortcut to the bridge, but you actually arrive sort of underneath the bridge. So in order to actually get to the bridge, you've got to go back past the encampment, go back to the crossroads just south of there, and then go around. So I just thought I'd mention that while I was doing this video. There are alternative Barovia maps people have made. So if you spend any time in the Curse of Strahd subreddit, you might have seen some, and if you just put in the search bar on the subreddit, Barovia map, you will probably see tons of different styles. There's sort of brown paper parchment styles, there's hand-drawn maps, which suggest that like people, whether it be Ismark or the Martikovs, are kind of drawing it from past knowledge or memory. There are incomplete maps where they might not contain places like the road towards the Amber Temple, because people rarely ever go up there, stuff like that. So if you are fancying something a little bit different from the sort of map included in the book, I recommend having a look at those. And I'm sure there's some that are kind of spoiler light or spoiler free for players' eyes, and the ones that are like labelled for DM's eyes only. Should you give your players a map? I sometimes see discussions online where someone will say, I've started Curse of Strahd, do I just show them the map from the book? I would say no, not straight away. Think about it from their perspective. They've arrived in this strange land, they don't know where they are. They're not going to know that there's the whole map and the layout and the roads and the settlements and the points of interest. I would say that when they arrive in the village of Barovia, Ismark and Irina can give them sort of rough directions to Vallaki from there, with potentially stopping at Tser Falls encampment on the way for the card reading. And then when I ran Curse of Strahd, I used Roll20, and I did the sort of gradual reveal thing. I think it's called Fog of War. They might change the name, where you can just reveal bit by bit. So they, traveling the road, and then they sort of see more and more as they go, and leave that revealed so that like part of the map is complete. Think of games like Age of Empires and Command and Conquer as well. They do that kind of thing. And then later on, when they do get hold of one, you can then remove the Fog of War and they can see the whole map. In terms of how and when they get one, Esmeralda has one. Rules was written in her wagon. Now, the wagon is notorious for exploding because of all the sort of trap that's in there. You could change it so that it's in her possession already instead. Or perhaps that Van Richten or the Martikovs have one. If, say, something happens to the wagon, they might be able to provide a map. When I was a player of Curse of Strahd before DMing it, that's what our DM did. I think it was the Martikovs who gave us a map. It also says in the Van Richten's Tower chapter that Esmeralda found that map, the one that's in a wagon, at the top of Van Richten's Tower. So you could just tweak the timeline a bit and say that Ez hasn't found it yet, and if they explore Van Richten's Tower, they see the map at the top. Let's talk about random encounters next. So rules as written, you roll for them every 30 minutes, but there's only 2 every 12 hours. And there's also an increased chance of one happening if they are off-road, if they're in the wilderness. And there are 2 tables, there's a day table and a night table. One thing I don't think is talked about is times of day. Now, I like the idea of it being, I think my days were 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. So rather than being like 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., so it's 12 hours each, I like the idea of that for a number of reasons. One, it gives them less chance to travel during the day when it's daytime. 2, it feels very autumnal, which feels more Halloween-y. And I don't know, I feel it fits better than saying 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Let me know what you think and let me know if you did anything different. What I like as well is the tables are not D20 tables. They are a D12 and a D8. At first, when I saw that, I thought, that's weird, that's quirky, that's certainly a choice. But when you think about it, it means that they're more weighted to the middle. If it was a D20 table, then everything's got the same amount of chance, 1 in 20 chance of being rolled. But on D20 plus D8 table, the middle is weighted slightly more than the ends. It's less likely they're going to get something that's a 2 or a 20 versus the numbers in the middle. So I thought that was quite cool. And then I noticed as well, when I was rolling encounters, I'll talk about whether you should roll random encounters later on, I noticed that I was getting the ones in the middle more and rarely ever getting the ones at the sides. Or top or bottom, I guess. There is a Strahd's Spies sidebar. I'd actually forgotten about this. It's been a while since I ran Curse of Strahd, doing a wider Ravenloft sequel campaign these days, and forgot there was a whole Strahd Spies thing tied to the random encounters. So I didn't really do this. I always wondered if it was more to indicate to DMs Strahd, his omniscience and his omnipresence. He's everywhere, he's got spies everywhere, he knows all. And it does explain how they, the stealth versus passive perception, and then, if the spies get detected or not. And it suggests types of spies. They could be swarms of bats, they could be wandering Vistani. I would argue vampire spawn could work well for later level parties. Swarms of bats is cool though, because it does talk about as well as try and confiscate stuff from the players, like even if it's just like an heirloom or a trinket that Strahd can then use for scrying. And a swarm of bats could do that and then fly away, and it'd be hard for the players to sort of get that back. You could maybe consider the chase rules from the Dungeon Master's Guide. They're thinking of the 2014, I don't know. I do own the 2024 one, but I haven't looked at it in depth to know if there are chase rules. I'm assuming there are. I wouldn't necessarily limit it to the Svalich Road either. You could potentially have spies sort of hiding or show up in other locations where it makes sense to, and not limit it to just Svalich Road because it's mentioned in the random encounters on the Svalich Road section. If you use Strahd Spies and it worked really well, please leave a comment. I'd be interested to see how it went for you. I'm sure it'd be useful for other people watching this video as well. Should you do random encounters or random encounters? There are some DMs who like to roll as the book suggests. And there are some DMs who, they don't do random encounters, they do encounters on the road, but they're sort of planted and they're sort of scheduled, that kind of thing. I suppose it depends on what you like to do, how strict you are playing it rules as written. I like rolling to kind of get an idea of if an encounter would or wouldn't happen, because it might be there's one journey where they get 2 really tough ones, it might be a journey where they get none, especially if it's a short journey. But I don't necessarily use the ones in the book. I might tweak them. I might do mixed units, so instead of just being wolves or dire wolves, it's both. Or I might use some alternatives. I might change the monsters, for example. I would argue that you absolutely need one from the village of Barovia to Vallaki in the early stages of the campaign, just to help to justify its danger. Because you're likely to roll at least one random encounter during that long stretch. But if you don't, then your players are going to think, Irina, you probably could have travelled yourself, you're fine. So having one encounter on the way to there kind of helps to justify that Irina is Mark were right to hire adventurers or ask adventurers to help escort her to Vallaki. If you are doing them random, maybe consider pre-rolling. This is what I used to do. So rather than rolling them in front of the players and then having to sort of get the encounter ready in front of your players, although my DM, when I was a player of Curse of Strahd, did this. I think he liked the idea of rolling the dice as we're travelling. And it's like, oh, you just found some wolves. I always like to pre-roll, because that way I could get the map ready in advance, get the sort of tokens ready in advance on Roll20, and it not just suddenly be like, I need to just quickly get 12 wolf tokens out now. So you might want to consider that. As for maps of the Svalich Road Svalich Woods, obviously there's a lot of different maps of locations in Curse of Strahd, but there aren't any for the roads and the woods. However, there's plenty of maps out there, plenty of map makers. DM Andy comes to mind, where they've done maps of Svalich Road Svalich Woods. In fact, if you just type in Svalich in the Curse of Strahd subreddit search bar, you will get loads. Have your pick. There's some that will be free, some will be, this is free, but if you want alternatives, sign up to my Patreon kind of deal. And I'd say as well, as a sort of heads up, random encounters can be quite tricky, especially for a lower level party. But once they get to like sort of level 5 plus, depending on the random encounter, it might be really trivial. So you might want to mix it up, you might want to do tougher ones. I did a video about alternative random encounters you could consider for Curse of Strahd with some cool monsters from other 5th edition sources. Let's talk about flavour. So there's box text for Svalich Road and there's box text for Svalich Woods. And depending on which adventure hook you use, you will probably read those out, because I think at the end of the adventure hook it says go to section A and read that one, then go to section C and read that one. I think if you're doing the Mysterious Visitors hook, they might bypass sort of some of the start of the adventure and be taken straight away to Serpun Encampment to get the reading with Madame Eva. So if that happens, you could potentially read those box text sections out when they then start travelling on the road and see the woods for themselves. And one thing I always forget to do, because I don't think the book really kind of tells you to do this, and it's just something you don't really think about in the moment, or at least I don't, is the weather. Now, we know from what it says in the book that sunlight is sort of muted with heavy overcast. But one thing I never really talk about, and I always kick myself for forgetting, is heavy rain. And you can use it at like really sort of dramatic or funny moments. Say if they have a really tough battle on the road, or maybe they've just fought the hags at the windmill, everyone's beaten up, everyone's tired, maybe someone got KO'd, maybe someone got killed. And then, you could just say, and at that moment, the heavens open and there's heavy rain. And it's one of those things where your players will just think, could this day, if this day couldn't get any worse, now it's started to pour it down. It doesn't need to be any sort of mechanical thing like, oh, they catch a cold and that's going to affect, roll a con save. But you know what I mean? It's just cool for that sort of, they're thinking then that their players have got to like trounce through the Svalich Road. But, it's rainy, it's muddy, it's gross. Very Barovian. Very British as well, like being a British guy. It makes me think of just like most of the time I'm walking around outside, classic British weather. Let's talk briefly about travel at night. So I mentioned earlier about there's a sort of night table for the random encounters. My players didn't really travel at night much because some NPCs warned them, you probably don't want to be traveling around at night. And they kind of thought, well, a vampire is probably going to be more active at night, So they mostly traveled during the day and avoided the night. I've got a great anecdote, which is that when they were on their way back from Krezk one time, they were misjudged the time, or they were cutting it fine, and they were about to arrive into Barovia when it was nearly night time. And I changed the music, and I think I changed the map. They had there was a random encounter, and there was a battle, and I used a map that was more sort of a nighttime variant rather than just a standard one. And I could tell my players were a bit like, oh, let's get out of here. We need to get out of here. We need to get to Vallaki as soon as we can. So just subtle changes like that, like changing the music, making the music spookier or scarier, making the maps look a bit spookier and scarier can make a huge difference on having your players think, this is bad, we need to get out of here. We need to get to safety. And lastly, let's talk about potential extra locations you can add beyond what's already in Curse of Strahd. Now, I'm not hugely familiar with Curse of Strahd Reloaded by Dragon Carter, or Reloaded, which is the second version of the guide. I did actually look at the first version a few times and borrowed some stuff. I think one of the things I mentioned in my Curse of Strahd homebrew video, another popular video of mine, I included and ended up being a campaign highlight as well. So I do like his stuff. And I believe he's got some additional places you add, not just between, say, Village of Barovia and Vallaki, but all around Barovia there's just like, an abandoned building or a shrine or something else. So it might be worth having a look at those just for sort of making travel a bit more interesting than, say, Village of Barovia being road, and then maybe Serpun Encampment, then more road, and then the bridge. And actually there's a fair bit going on thinking about it. There's a bridge, there's the western gates of Barovia, there's a black carriage crossroads, but and then road, maybe the windmill road Vallaki. You might want to add some more stuff, or on the other side of the map as well you might want to. There are also some other towns from older lore, so I think Curse of Strahd works well in having 3 settlements and Vallaki being the main one, but there were some old towns and villages called Immel, Zeidenberg, or maybe that's Siedenberg, and Teufeldorf, I think is pronounced. I think those last 2 were from a different domain of Dread back in the days in Ravenloft lore when the domains were actually bordered with another domain, and it was a domain called Gundarak, and then it got sort of taken over. I don't know all the details, but that's one way you can add more settlements. Might be worth having a look at that and adding that to your game. And also, there were Adventurers League modules. The ones for Curse of Strahd, I think, were called Misty Fortunes and Absent Hearts, and I believe that had a village called Oraznu, which is north of Village of Barovia and north of Castle Ravenloft. And I'm pretty sure I saw somebody had edited the map of the land of Barovia that comes in the book to include Oraznu as well. I think I saw that on Reddit somewhere. So that could be another place you want to add as well. And that's it for this one. So I hope that was useful if you're new to Curse of Strahd or just started playing Curse of Strahd and you've quite gotten the grips with all the travel stuff, but also the tools I suggested and the other stuff. I hope it was useful to you. If you're new to the channel, hello. My name is Steve and I do 50-50 Curse of Strahd and Ravenloft videos. I've done about 40 to 50 of each at this point. The channel's been going for about a year and a half now. There might be some other videos, some I've mentioned as I've been doing this video, but if you look at the playlists on my channel, you might find some stuff that's useful. And we'll leave it there. Thank you, Mist Wanderers.